Beatrice Vance stood near the entrance of Westbridge Galleria, her weathered handbag pressed firmly against her hip. At 75 years old, her shoulders carried a slight stoop, not from shame, but from the decades of bending over sewing machines and scrubbing floors that had carved themselves into her spine. Her natural silver hair framed her face in soft waves, and despite the worn soles of her comfortable shoes hidden beneath her pressed slacks, she walked with quiet purpose. She had saved for 9 months. 9 long months of accepting every extra alteration job Mrs. Faith offered at the dry cleaners, reheating the same pot of soup for 3 dinners in a row, and ignoring the invitation to her book club's restaurant outings. All to gather enough cash to buy a proper suit for her grandson Marcus, the first person in their family to graduate from college. The navy blue blazer she had circled in the store catalog would look perfect on him. It had to be perfect. The mall was crowded that Saturday afternoon, filled with young families carrying designer shopping bags and teenagers who moved through the polished corridors like they owned them. Beatrice felt the weight of every glance that slid past her, every subtle step aside that suggested she didn't quite belong in this temple of glass and marble. But she had every right to be there. Her money was honest money, earned through calloused hands and unwavering determination. When she finally reached the men's clothing store, Beatrice approached the counter with her envelope of carefully smoothed bills. She had no idea that the man in the bespoke charcoal suit examining cufflinks 2 aisles over had noticed her the moment she entered, and she certainly didn't know that his tattooed neck, barely concealed by his collar, marked him as the most dangerous man in the city, or that what was about to happen would change everything. The sales associate behind the counter was young, mid-20s perhaps, with a name tag that read Mr. Brennan, store manager, in crisp silver lettering. His suit probably cost more than Beatrice's monthly pension check. He looked up from his tablet as she approached, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to something colder the moment his eyes landed on her worn handbag. Beatrice placed the envelope on the glass counter with gentle care. "Good afternoon. I'd like to purchase the navy suit from your window display. Size 42 long if you have it." Mr. Brennan didn't reach for the envelope. Instead, he glanced toward the window, then back at her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "That's our Menegildo Zegna collection. The jacket alone is $1,800. "Yes, I know." Beatrice opened the envelope, revealing the neat stack of bills she had organized by denomination. 20s, 10s, 5s. She had counted it 3 times that morning. "I have $2,150. The suit, a shirt, and a tie, if possible." The manager's jaw tightened as he stared at the cash. He didn't touch it. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see a credit card or bank card for a purchase of this size." "I prefer to pay cash." Beatrice kept her voice steady, though her heart had begun to hammer against her ribs. "Is there a problem?" "The problem," Mr. Brennan said, lowering his voice but somehow making it sharper, "is that we have standards here. This isn't a thrift store. Those bills look like they've been through a washing machine." He gestured vaguely at her clothes, her bag. "Frankly, customers like you ruin the aesthetic we've worked very hard to cultivate." The words hit like a slap. Beatrice felt heat crawl up her neck. Around them, other shoppers had begun to notice. A woman in yoga clothes paused mid-stride. 2 teenagers whispered behind their phones. "I've been a paying customer at stores like this for 50 years, Beatrice said quietly, but her voice wavered. "My money is legal tender. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Mr. Brennan stepped back from the counter, his hand moving toward the phone. "If you don't go voluntarily, I'll have security escort you out. We can't have this disruption." Beatrice's fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope. The shame was suffocating, pressing down on her chest like a stone. She had been foolish to think she belonged here, foolish to imagine that her carefully saved dollars would be enough. She didn't see the man in the charcoal suit step away from the cufflinks display. She didn't notice how the ambient noise of the store seemed to fade as he moved through the space like a shadow cutting through light. But Mr. Brennan saw him. and the color drained from his face. The man appeared at Beatrice's side so quietly she startled. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with dark hair styled precisely and eyes the color of winter ice. But it was his neck that drew attention. Black ink crawled up from beneath his collar in intricate patterns, wolves and thorns intertwining in a design that spoke of allegiances and violence in equal measure. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried through the store like a blade drawn from its sheath. Mr. Brennan's hand froze above the phone. "Mr. Volpe, I didn't see you come in. This is just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. Lorenzo Volpe let the words hang in the air. He picked up Beatrice's envelope from the counter, examined the bills with the same attention another man might give a wine list. "These look like United States currency to me. Legal tender for all debts, public and private. That's what it says, isn't it?" "Sir, I was simply explaining our store policy." "Your policy?" Lorenzo set the envelope down and turned his full attention to the manager. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Your policy is to humiliate elderly women who come to your store with cash in hand? To accuse honest people of being beneath your aesthetic?" Beatrice found her voice. "Please, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Lorenzo's expression softened when he glanced at her, just for a moment, before returning to Mr. Brennan. "She reminds me of someone. Someone who deserved better than what this world gave her." The manager was sweating now, his expensive cologne turning sour. "I apologize if I was unclear. Of course we can process the transaction." "On your knees." The words cut through the space like a gunshot. Several shoppers gasped. The woman in yoga clothes backed toward the exit. "I'm sorry." Mr. Brennan's voice cracked. "You heard me." Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You wanted to make her feel small. You wanted her to know her place. So now I'm going to teach you yours. On your knees, and you process the sale with the respect she walked in here deserving. "Mr. Volpe, please, I have a career." "You have 5 seconds. Lorenzo checked his watch, a gesture so casual it was terrifying. "After that, I make a phone call, and you'll discover exactly how small your career actually is." The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Then, slowly, Mr. Brennan sank to his knees behind the counter. His hands shook as he reached for the envelope. When he looked up at Beatrice, his eyes were wet with humiliation. "Ma'am," he whispered, "it would be my honor to help you today." Beatrice stood frozen, her mouth dry, unable to process what was happening. The man beside her, this Lorenzo Volpe with wolves etched into his skin, had just shattered every rule of civilization she understood. And he'd done it for her. The suit was wrapped in tissue paper and placed in an embossed shopping bag with ribbon handles. Mr. Brennan had included a complimentary silk tie and pocket square, his hands still trembling as he processed the transaction from his knees. Lorenzo had watched in silence until the receipt was printed, then turned to Beatrice with an expression that was almost shy. "Let me drive you home." "That's not necessary," Beatrice said, though her legs felt unsteady. "I can take the bus." "Please." Something in his voice made it impossible to refuse. "I insist." The SUV was black and enormous, with windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside until Lorenzo opened the door for her. The interior smelled like leather and something else, gun oil, maybe, though Beatrice didn't want to think about that. She clutched the shopping bag on her lap as they pulled out of the parking garage. They drove in silence for several blocks before Lorenzo spoke. "You remind me of my mother." Beatrice glanced at him, surprised. Up close, without the danger radiating from him, he looked tired. Human. "Is she still alive?"
"No.
"She died when I was 17. His jaw tightened. "Worked herself to death cleaning office buildings at night, factories during the day. She wanted to send me to college. Instead, she collapsed in some executive's bathroom and lay there for 6 hours before anyone found her." "I'm sorry." Don't be. Lorenzo's hands flexed on the steering wheel. It taught me everything I needed to know about how this world treats people like her. Like you. I'm nothing like you, Beatrice said quietly but without judgment. You hurt people. He didn't deny it. Yes. Then why did you help me? Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, navigating through traffic with surprising care. Because you looked at me like I was human. Everyone else in that store, the moment they recognized me, they either fawned or fled. But you? He smiled barely. You just wanted to buy a suit for your grandson. How did you know? I heard you talking to yourself while you were waiting. You do that, you know, rehearsing what you'd say. His voice was gentle. You mentioned his graduation. Beatrice felt her throat tighten. Marcus. He's studying engineering. Your husband would be proud. My husband died thinking our family would never amount to anything. She surprised herself with the honesty. But Marcus is different. He's going to have a real life. Lorenzo pulled up in front of her small house with its peeling paint and overgrown garden. He didn't comment on the neighborhood, didn't let his eyes linger on the poverty evident in every cracked sidewalk and chain-link fence. Mrs. Vance, he said as she reached for the door handle. If you ever need anything. I won't. But she paused, meeting his ice-blue eyes. Thank you, Lorenzo. Despite everything you are, today you were kind. He watched her walk to her door, the shopping bag swinging at her side. And for the first time in 15 years, Lorenzo Volpe felt something he'd thought long dead, the possibility of redemption. The photograph was grainy but clear enough. Beatrice climbing into Lorenzo's SUV, his hand steadying her elbow. The image had been taken from across the parking garage by someone with a telephoto lens and a professional interest in Lorenzo Volpe's movements. Carlo Moretti studied the photo on his tablet, his expression thoughtful. He sat in the back office of a restaurant his family had owned for 3 generations, though the marinara sauce simmering in the kitchen was the least profitable thing happening on the premises. Who is she? He asked his nephew Vincent, who stood beside him with his arms crossed. Nobody. Some old lady. Our guy says Volpe made a scene at that boutique in Westbridge, then drove her home himself. Vincent shrugged. Probably just charity work. You know how he gets about his dead mother. Lorenzo Volpe doesn't do charity. Carlo zoomed in on Beatrice's face, noting the shopping bag, the way Lorenzo looked at her. He does business, and he does revenge. This woman is neither. So, what's your point? My point, Carlo said slowly, is that Lorenzo Volpe hasn't shown genuine care for another human being since we put a bullet in his cousin 6 years ago. If he's protecting this woman, she matters to him. And if she matters to him, she's leverage. Vincent's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to take her? I want to send a message. Carlos set the tablet down. Lorenzo thinks he's untouchable. He thinks his reputation and his muscle make him invincible. But every man has a weakness, and apparently his is old women who remind him of his sainted mother. Beatrice knew none of this as she rode the bus to her weekly grocery shopping 3 days later. She had already altered the suit's trousers to fit Marcus perfectly, and the graduation was only 2 weeks away. The thought made her smile as she walked down the cereal aisle, comparing prices on oatmeal. She didn't notice the man in the Moretti family baseball cap watching her from the produce section. She didn't see him speak quietly into his phone, or the way 2 other men entered the store and positioned themselves near the exits. When she finally headed toward the checkout, her canvas shopping bag heavy with carefully selected items, the man in the baseball cap moved to intercept her. His smile was polite, unthreatening, the kind of expression that made elderly women feel safe. Excuse me, ma'am? I think you dropped this outside. He held out a wallet, not hers, but she leaned in to look at it anyway. That was when his partner moved in from behind, and the chloroform-soaked cloth covered her nose and mouth before she could even think to scream. Her groceries scattered across the linoleum floor. A can of soup rolled under a display of discounted bread. And by the time the teenage cashier looked up from his phone to investigate the noise, Beatrice Vance was already being carried through the back delivery entrance into a waiting van. If a stranger defended you, but you knew they had a dark past, would you trust them or run? Comment below your thoughts. Lorenzo's men found her 4 hours later. She was locked in a storage unit on the industrial edge of the city, bound to a chair but unharmed except for the bruise blooming across her cheekbone where she'd struggled. They'd left her there as bait, waiting for Lorenzo to come charging in so they could ambush him. But Lorenzo Volpe hadn't survived 2 decades in his world by being predictable. He sent 20 men instead of coming himself. By the time he arrived, the Moretti soldiers were zip-tied and bleeding on the concrete floor, and Beatrice was wrapped in someone's jacket, shaking but silent. She didn't speak during the ride to the safe house. Didn't flinch when Lorenzo's doctor examined her bruises. But when Lorenzo finally sat down across from her in the sterile living room, she met his eyes with something that looked like fury. "This is my fault," he said before she could speak. "I should have known they'd use you against me." "They?" Beatrice's voice was hoarse. "Who are they?" "People I've been at war with for years. The Moretti family." Lorenzo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Mrs. Vance, I need you to understand something. What happened today was a warning. Next time, they won't just lock you in a storage unit. They'll kill me." "I understand." She pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders. "So, what happens now? You hide me away somewhere? Change my name? Make me disappear, so I can't be used as leverage?" "Yes." He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "I have a house in Montana. Secure, remote. You'd be safe there until—" "No." The word hung in the air between them, like a thrown gauntlet. Lorenzo blinked, clearly unused to being refused. "Mrs. Vance, you don't understand the danger." "I understand perfectly." Beatrice stood, and despite her small frame and 75 years, there was steel in her spine. "For 50 years, I made myself small. I apologized for taking up space. I accepted being invisible, being dismissed, being pushed into corners by people who thought I didn't matter. And then you came along and made me feel seen. For one afternoon, I mattered. You still matter. That's why I'm trying to protect you. By making me disappear?" Her voice cracked. "By sending me to Montana to live in hiding while you fight your wars? That's not protection, Lorenzo. That's erasure." He stood too, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Then what do you want me to do? Let them kill you to prove a point? I want you to let me choose." Beatrice moved closer to him, her eyes fierce despite the tears gathering in them. "For the first time in decades, I feel alive. I'm terrified, yes. But I'm not invisible anymore. And I won't let you or anyone else push me back into that corner, even if it's for my own good." Lorenzo stared at her, this impossible woman who should be begging for safety, but was instead demanding agency. Despite everything, his power, his reputation, his carefully constructed armor, he felt something crack inside his chest. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said quietly. "Maybe." Beatrice smiled, sad and defiant. "But I'll die mattering. Can you say the same?" Lorenzo had assigned 2 men to watch her house. Professionals who knew how to blend into the neighborhood, to look like utility workers or delivery drivers while keeping Beatrice in their sight lines at all times. But the Morettis had been planning this for days, and they'd brought enough manpower to make the watchers irrelevant. Beatrice was in her garden when they came. It was Tuesday morning, the kind of spring day that made her old bones feel almost young again. She was on her knees in the dirt, planting tomatoes the way her husband had taught her 40 years ago, when the first van pulled up to her curb. She looked up, squinting against the sun, as 6 men emerged. They moved with military precision, 2 heading for her watchers while the others came through her gate. She tried to stand, tried to run, but her knees were stiff from kneeling, and one of them was already on her. "Please," she gasped as they lifted her bodily from her garden. My grandson's graduation is next week. Shut up. The man's breath smelled like cigarettes and coffee. He zip-tied her wrists with practiced efficiency, while another threw a hood over her head. The world went dark and her breathing echoed loud in the confined space. She heard gunshots, her watchers fighting back, then nothing. Just the sound of a van door sliding open and hands shoving her inside. The engine roared to life, and she was thrown against someone else's legs as they accelerated away. Lorenzo received the message 2 hours later. It came as a video file sent from an untraceable number. Carlo Moretti's face filled the screen, his expression almost apologetic. "Lorenzo, my friend. I hope this finds you well." Carlo's voice was smooth, practiced. "I have something of yours. Or rather, someone who seems to have become important to you." The camera panned to show Beatrice. She was in a chair in what looked like a warehouse, her hands bound behind her. There was blood on her temple where they'd hit her, but her eyes were clear and angry. "Say hello, grandmother," Carlo prompted. "Go to hell," Beatrice spat.
Carlo laughed, genuinely amused.
"She is spirit, I'll give you that. Which makes this offer all the more generous. The docks, Lorenzo. Your entire shipping operation at the harbor. Sign it over to me, and I'll return Mrs. Vance unharmed. You have 24 hours. The video zoomed in on Beatrice's face. Despite the blood, despite the fear she had to be feeling, she looked directly into the camera with an expression Lorenzo recognized. It was the same look she'd given him in the safe house, the same defiance that had cracked something open in his chest. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice steady. "Don't you dare give them anything for me." The video ended. Lorenzo stood in his office, his phone in his hand, and stared at the black screen for a long moment. The docks represented 20% of his revenue, his primary import route, and leverage over half the Port Authority. It had taken him 10 years to secure that territory. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Gather everyone. Full mobilization. We're going to war." His second-in-command hesitated. "Boss, the docks are worth nothing," Lorenzo said quietly, "compared to her life." They hit the warehouse at 3 in the morning, but Lorenzo didn't wait for stealth. He came with fire. His advisors had begged him to negotiate, to find another way, to at least consider the strategic value of what he was about to sacrifice. But Lorenzo had stopped listening after the third viewing of that video, after seeing the blood on Beatrice's temple and the way she'd told him not to save her. She'd spent her whole life being told she didn't matter. He'd be damned if he let that be her final truth. The Molotov cocktails went through the warehouse windows first, crude but effective. Then his men breached the doors, while the Moretti soldiers were still scrambling to understand what was happening. Lorenzo went in with the first wave, his gun drawn but his focus singular. He didn't care about the men shooting at him or the empire he was burning to the ground. He cared about finding one 75-year-old woman before the smoke and flames consumed everything. He found her in a back room, still zip-tied to the chair. Carlo Moretti stood behind her with a gun to her head, his face red with rage and panic. "You're insane," Carlo shouted over the sound of gunfire and crackling flames. "You're destroying everything for this nobody." "She's not nobody." Lorenzo's gun never wavered from Carlo's forehead. "And you were dead the moment you touched her." The shot was clean, professional. Carlo dropped before his finger could tighten on the trigger. Beatrice didn't scream. She closed her eyes and took a shuddering breath as Lorenzo holstered his weapon and cut her bonds with a knife he pulled from his belt. "Can you walk?" he asked, helping her to her feet. "I think so." But her legs buckled, whether from being bound too long or from shock. Lorenzo didn't know. He caught her before she fell and lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing. The warehouse was an inferno now. Smoke billowed through the corridors, thick and black and choking. Lorenzo's men had already pulled back, and he could hear sirens in the distance. He moved through the flames with Beatrice pressed against his chest, her face buried in his shoulder as embers fell around them like deadly snow. The heat was unbearable. His suit jacket started to smoke. But he didn't stop, didn't slow, just kept moving toward the exit he knew was there even though he couldn't see it through the darkness. When they finally burst through into the cool night air, his men rushed forward to help. But Lorenzo didn't let her go, not immediately. He carried her all the way to the waiting SUV, her gray hair singed at the edges, his hands blackened with soot. "You came for me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke. "Of course I did." Lorenzo set her gently in the back seat, his ice-blue eyes meeting hers. "You matter, Beatrice. You've always mattered." Behind them, the warehouse collapsed in on itself with a roar like a dying beast. The docks, the territory, the strategic advantage, all of it smoke and ash. And Lorenzo Volpe, who had built an empire on calculated cruelty, felt no regret whatsoever. They kept her at Lorenzo's estate for 3 days while she recovered. The doctor came twice daily to check her lungs and change the dressing on her burns. Lorenzo's staff treated her like visiting royalty, though she heard them whispering in the hallways about what their boss had sacrificed to bring her home. On the 4th morning, Lorenzo found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench with her face turned toward the sun. Marcus's graduation had been yesterday. She'd missed it. The suit she'd bought hung in a closet somewhere in her empty house unworn. "I'm sorry," Lorenzo said, sitting beside her. "About your grandson. He understands." Beatrice's voice was still rough from the smoke. "I called him from the hospital, told him I'd been in an accident." She looked at Lorenzo with tired eyes. "I didn't tell him his grandmother has become entangled with organized crime." "You don't have to stay entangled." Lorenzo pulled an envelope from his jacket. "There's a house in Arizona. Scottsdale. Quiet neighborhood, good security. I've arranged for a stipend, enough that you'll never have to worry about money again. You can start over somewhere safe." Beatrice took the envelope but didn't open it. "And you? What happens to you?" "I rebuild. Find new revenue streams. Deal with the power vacuum the Morettis left behind." He shrugged as if discussing the weather. "This is my world, Mrs. Vance. It's what I know." "Is it what you want?" The question caught him off guard. Lorenzo stared at his scarred knuckles, at the wolf tattoos that marked him as something irredeemable. "Want doesn't matter in my line of work. Only survival." "That's a coward's answer." Beatrice set the envelope aside. "You pulled me out of fire, Lorenzo. You gave up everything for a woman you barely know. That's not survival. That's humanity trying to claw its way back." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want Arizona." She turned to face him fully, and despite the bandages and the exhaustion, there was fire in her eyes. "I want a seat at your table." Lorenzo blinked. "You can't be serious. You have resources. Money, influence, people who fear you enough to listen." Beatrice's voice grew stronger. "Use them, not for territory or revenge, but for something that actually matters. You broke these streets, Lorenzo. Now help me fix them. I'm a criminal. I've killed people. I know exactly what you are." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and weathered against his. "But I also know what you could be. You said I reminded you of your mother. What would she want you to do, with all this power?" The question hit like a physical blow. Lorenzo saw his mother's face, remembered her calloused hands and tired smile, the way she'd died alone and forgotten. "She'd want me to matter," he whispered. "Then matter." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "Not as the wolf everyone fears, but as the man who makes things better. Start community centers. Fund scholarships. Clean up the neighborhoods your drug trade poisoned. Give people like your mother a fighting chance." Lorenzo looked at this impossible woman who should be running from him, but was instead offering him redemption. "You're asking me to dismantle my own empire. I'm asking you to rebuild it into something worth having." She smiled. "Do we have a deal?" He thought about the docks, about Carlo Moretti's blood on the warehouse floor, about every choice that had led him to this moment. Then he thought about Beatrice, walking with her head high, refusing to be invisible. "We have a deal," Lorenzo said. "Partner." 6 months later, Beatrice stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Volpe Community Center, a building that had once been an abandoned factory in the heart of her old neighborhood. Lorenzo had spared no expense. The facility had a computer lab, a basketball court, tutoring rooms, and a commercial kitchen where local seniors could learn culinary skills. The sign above the door read, "In memory of Maria Volpe," and beneath it, in smaller letters, "Director, Beatrice Vance." She wore a new suit, tailored perfectly, though not nearly as expensive as the one she'd bought for Marcus. Her grandson stood beside her now, home from his engineering job in Seattle for the opening. He kept glancing at Lorenzo, who stood a respectful distance away with his security detail, trying to reconcile the tattooed man in the expensive suit with his grandmother's unlikely business partner. "You're sure about this?" Marcus whispered as the mayor approached the microphone. "More sure than I've been about anything in years." Beatrice squeezed his arm. "I spent half my life invisible, Marcus. I'm not going back to that." The crowd was larger than she'd expected. Families from the neighborhood, local business owners, even a few reporters who'd gotten wind of Lorenzo Volpe's surprising philanthropic turn. There was skepticism, of course. People didn't forget what he was or what he'd done. But they also couldn't ignore the construction crews repairing houses, the scholarship fund that had sent 12 kids to college, or the fact that drug arrests in the area had dropped by 40% since Lorenzo started actively pushing dealers out of his territory. Beatrice caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd and felt a cold satisfaction bloom in her chest. Mr. Brennan stood near the back, his suit cheaper than she remembered, his expression a mixture of bitterness and disbelief. She'd heard through Lorenzo's network that he'd been fired from the boutique the day after the incident. His name quietly circulated among luxury retailers as someone who'd created a liability. He worked at a department store now, folding shirts for half his former salary. He noticed her looking and quickly turned away. The mayor finished his remarks and handed Beatrice the oversized scissors. She stepped forward to cut the ribbon, and as she did, she felt Lorenzo's eyes on her. When she glanced back, he nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals. The ribbon fell away, and children rushed through the doors, their excited voices echoing through the new space. Beatrice watched them go, these kids who would grow up with opportunities their parents never had, in a neighborhood that was finally being given a second chance. "Mrs. Vance." A reporter approached with a microphone. "Some people are calling you the queen of the neighborhood. How does that feel?" Beatrice smiled, thinking of the woman she'd been 6 months ago, clutching wrinkled bills in a mall store, apologizing for existing. "I'm not a queen," she said. "I'm just someone who stopped being invisible. And I'm helping others do the same." That evening, as the celebration wound down, Lorenzo found her sitting in one of the tutoring rooms, running her hand over the new desks. "Your mother would be proud," Beatrice said without looking up. "I think," Lorenzo said quietly, "she'd be more proud of you." He sat across from her, this woman who had somehow taken his blood money and turned it into hope. "Thank you for not letting me waste my second chance." Beatrice met his ice-blue eyes and saw something she'd never expected to find there: peace. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me mine." Outside, the sun set over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across streets that were slowly learning to heal. And in a building that bore a dead woman's name and a living woman's vision, two unlikely partners sat in comfortable silence, neither of them invisible anymore. If you enjoyed Beatrice and Lorenzo's story of redemption, dignity, and unexpected friendship, please like this story and subscribe for more. Your support helps me create more stories that celebrate the strength of those society overlooks.